Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and no, the picture behind me is not fake, but if you want to watch that video, I already did it. I'm sure we're going to be talking about it today with Whitney Webb because we're really talking about the two biggest stories that are concerning our lives, at least here in the States, and I think globally. Obviously, COVID 1984, Operation Warp Speed, and the latest developments on Chaos 2020 and where all these court cases are headed, where they are today, and what we can expect in the future. If you don't know Whitney, I don't know who you are and why you're here, because obviously you know Whitney. She is from unlimitedhangout.com. She also does great work across the board at places like The Last American Vagabond, and was gracious enough to join us on this glorious of holidays that's been canceled, Black Friday, which is really not a thing anymore because of all this.
Yeah.
Whitney, how are you? How was your holiday? And what are you doing today?
I didn't really celebrate Thanksgiving, I guess, because I don't live in the U.S., but it was all right. And, I also don't celebrate Black Friday either, even when I lived in the States, because it's kind of a clusterfuck. So I'm just chilling.
I get it on the clusterfuck, but like every year, usually what I would do is, especially as it got earlier and earlier and earlier, not that it mattered because I'm a night owl, but I'd have a few things planned out that were for Christmas that I'd literally get 50 to 75% off on. I'd go. I'd be in and out. I wouldn't wrestle people, but that was it. And it was done. And then everything's in a box until Christmas. The online stuff was brutal this year. I mean, they put an online deal up and they'd only be for 5 minutes. I guess consumerism isn't really what we should be worried about at this point. Anyway, but Operation Warp Speed is something we should be extremely concerned as it's being canvassed all over our media as the ultimate solution to this, when in fact the fine print says otherwise, especially when you just take a look at Fauci telling
Totally. Yeah. I mean, they're openly admitting that. I mean, they're basically like, okay, so you're going to get the vaccine, but all the masks, the social distancing, all these lockdowns and stuff are going to stay. And they've already said like, oh, COVID's going to mutate. You're going to have to get the vaccine every year. And the vaccine already is a multi-dose vaccine. So that's like going to be a minimum 2 jabs a year with this shit. And it's wild.
And it's not like they don't tell you these bits and pieces in the mainstream media. They do. It's just not the focal point. It's not the drive. It's not what you're hearing all day, every day. We highlighted this week the CNBC article that's headline is the COVID vaccination won't be a walk in the park and the people should know about it. And it highlights the fact that many will have
walk in the park.
I mean, walk. I couldn't even believe. And you think that's just a headline, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's not a headline. If you go into the article, it's the woman warning the FDA from the American Medical Association. It is her quote. And then as you go through this, it is clear that you are getting all the symptoms, the severe symptoms, by the way, of COVID-19 outside of ARDS and the lung problems. Okay, they never say it gets to that point, but every other side effect, high fever, body aches, some people not even recovering after a day. They say, oh, well, some people were done in less than a day, but then they go into these other cases where they have these debilitatory like symptoms for days, weeks, and sometimes even months with this.
Yeah.
And
this you also have like the Oxford vaccine now. They just admitted another person in their trial in Brazil died, like straight up is dead. And they're like, oh, well, before they tried to be like, oh, it wasn't the vaccine's fault. But now a Brazilian health official has said, yeah, this was definitely the vaccine's fault this time. So now AstraZeneca's shares are sinking or whatever. But
and let's talk about that.
Holy crap, dude.
Because the death that I covered in the media about a month ago, that there was a little slight bit of media coverage. What I would argue was the spin around that is that this person had taken the placebo. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that they didn't take the placebo, but I'm not going to.
Do you know what the placebo is in these trials for the Oxford vaccine?
Tell us.
It's the meningitis vaccine. It's not like a saline solution or whatever like the placebo's supposed to be. It's a meningitis vaccine that has a long history of causing adverse effects, so that masks any adverse effects that the new vaccine would have. It's like intentionally set up to allow that vaccine to be approved for safety. And keep in mind, all of these vaccines have complete liability, right? So like if they maim and kill people, you can't do anything about it. And really, if you think about it, in terms of corporations, I mean, vaccine manufacturers are really the only ones that just get, a blank check to produce whatever, they want without any consequences for its safety or whatever. They are basically, they can't be held accountable for whatever happens. They've set up their trials, so they're designed to succeed, and they'll get approved anyway. They've been selling for months, hundreds of millions of doses, and that's not just Pfizer, right? It's the AstraZeneca vaccine and a bunch of other ones. They haven't even been approved by any government, but they've already, those governments have already put down, millions of dollars to buy a product that hasn't been proven to work yet, right? And so, I mean, to think that they're just going to let that money, just let it.
Yeah, we're not taking the money. We're not in this for profits, even though Bill Gates clearly said that they will be a for-profit vaccine. In fact, in that same...
well, Bill Gates' whole fucking philanthropy for vaccines, like Gavi, you go to their website and it says it's for the health of vaccine markets. That's what they're promoting, not the health of like public health or like regular people or health of people in developing countries, the health of vaccine markets. I mean, that straight up tells you what this shit is about.
And not only that, a market in which he giggled at the last Davos that produces in many cases a 20-to-1 return rate. And he literally says in the same breath, you can't get much better than that anywhere else, telling you this is the most profitable thing he could possibly be doing, and you think he's fucking Santa Claus. I assure you. He's not Santa Claus.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, or Mr. Rogers, right? Because he wears like the sweater vest, and but it doesn't really hide the fact that he's Montgomery Burns. He's done his best. Yeah. But the giggles, man. Every time Bill Gates giggles, that is insanely sinister. I don't know.
Well, so one of the things we did when we were going over this article, which talks again about the body aches, the pains, the high fevers, was comparing that with his interview in July, where he essentially admits to the same exact thing, but then tries to say, well, a lot of those side effects were just a severe pain. He says severe pain in the arm from the shot. But again, I think people need to understand there is no reason that this thing has to, lower mortality rates or lower infection rates. He says that in the same breath. The only difference, Whitney, that I've noticed from his interview, because again, it's just going to produce antibodies. And remember, for all you people that had it, they're not testing you for antibodies before they shoot you up. In other words, they're not going to go, here you go. Oh, wait, you already have them. You don't need to take the shot. If this had any legitimacy, of course, that would be part of the process, but it's not. The only difference I have seen between the interviews in July is that Bill Gates then, when talking about AstraZeneca and Moderna, was saying a 50% efficacy rate. So worked about half the times. And again, I don't take anything at face value. I'm telling you what the authoritative sources are telling us. Now, when you go around the media, this doctor, I can't pronounce his name off the bat, but I'm sure you'll know what his name is. He's promoting that these things are a 90 to 95% efficacy rate, Whitney. Go into that. How are they able to go from 50 to 90 to 95%? Is that legitimate, or is that built into the system with loopholes?
Well, you have to keep in mind that number, those are the self-reported results from these companies that haven't been subject to any scrutiny. You have to keep in mind too that all previous years, all of these mRNA vaccines were shown to be not efficacious and were never taken to market. I mean, they've been around for at least 10 years, if not longer, and they've never been able to successfully produce one and market it because they haven't been able to show that it actually works. So now we're relying on these self-reported claims from companies like Pfizer and Moderna that this is our efficacy rate, and it's basically just a marketing ploy because you basically see them release those numbers. 90% efficacy, then the shares of that company go up. And we've seen every time that's happened for Moderna and Pfizer, the main people have these massive stock sell-offs on those days and just totally cash out and make bank. And people are like, oh, that's fine. That's not a sign of corruption when yeah, dude, that's pretty much textbook corruption. So
it's cartoon level Wolf of Wall Street shit in your face if you were paying the slightest bit of attention to. Listen, what I've been watching lately, out of all the news networks, because I have 3,000 channels and I can go global, is Bloomberg International. And obviously I'm doing that because I want to see where the markets are moving, what these CEOs are saying. And Whitney, not only is this vaccine getting pushed, but this 2030 agenda is so in your face.
Yeah,
it's being mentioned.
It all goes together.
Yeah, it's being mentioned again and again and again. And you're not hearing it on MSNBC as much, and you're not hearing it on CNN as much unless you go to the international station. But in European markets, this is rolling out rather quickly. What are your predictions now that you said, again, for those that don't know, explain to them why they've been able to sell these vaccines in the hundreds of thousands and millions, because they're getting paid to mass produce them. Basically, because the moment that they are approved by the FDA, they can go to market. So all the stuff that they've been producing and haven't used and aren't going to use, that got bought anyway and it's on the shelf. But from here on out, after it is approved, they've already said 20 to 30 million doses in the United States out of the gates, and then another 20 million produced each month rolling out. Explain all of this to my audience.
Well, it's pretty intense, right? But basically, it's a phased approach of vaccination based on how fast they can ramp up production, right? So what they're doing is they're initially identifying priority groups that are going to get it first. And then, they're basically going to, as they have more supply, they're going to be giving it to greater and larger swaths of the population, basically. What's freaky is that the company that was contracted to decide and map out this whole vaccination delivery plan is Palantir. And Palantir created a special software just for this that's called Tiberius. And Tiberius is built off of Palantir's Gotham software, which is the software used by the CIA, DHS, the national security state at large, basically in law enforcement, right? Including for predictive policing programs that Palantir's piloted and then have now been offset to Carbine 911, which Peter Thiel of Palantir also funded, right? But what's nuts is that these priority groups that they're identifying are basically minorities, Latinos and African Americans. And those are the same groups that Palantir targets through their contracts with Customs or ICE at DHS, and also through their predictive policing law enforcement contracts. And they're going to decide which zip codes, which demographics, which areas need to be vaccinated first. And that also is being fed not just by data related to warp speed, but all of the data that HHS has acquired as it relates to coronavirus, a system called HHS Protect that Palantir also runs. All of that data, and also all of the COVID-19 vaccine trial data to determine, how different vaccine candidates affect different population subgroups, right? So basically, Tiberius isn't only identifying who to vaccinate first, but which demographic, which group or subgroup of the population to vaccinate with what vaccine candidate based on how it affects that particular subgroup. And of course, none of this is transparent. We don't know exactly, what those criteria are that they're using. But I mean, it's just a mass of data, and a lot of it is sensitive, really sensitive health data, of Americans, because they're also part of something that's being run by MITRE Corporation, who are really shady, called the COVID-19 Healthcare Coalition. That's like, all the big tech companies, all the electronic health records companies, and a bunch of universities like MIT and Harvard, who InQtel is on there too, and then all the U.S. national laboratories, all sharing data all together to come up with, analytics to fight COVID, they say. But Palantir has access to all of those people's data that they're feeding into this Gotham software that's for warp speed called Tiberius, which, by the way, has a new AI component. And this whole race aspect of it, I wrote about recently. It's really sinister if you actually go and you read their strategies about it, because basically they say, well, we have to vaccinate African Americans first because this is the first year where people in the U.S. really care about police brutality. Well, what does police brutality have to do with vaccinating them first? And then it says it's the way to combat structural racism in the healthcare system in the U.S. Okay, so that's only for vaccines, apparently. Like giving
Let me just
African
stop you.
Americans access to health care or anything like that. That's not what it is.
Yeah,
They're
let me just stop
the
you.
vaccine.
They go after fucking poor people. If you're listening to her, everything is all about targeting poor people. It's not about helping anybody. They look at the most vulnerable population. They look at the ones with the least resources and the ones that, if they want to fight back and if they want to organize, are going to have the most obstacles. And of course, they're going to go to people that are on social services and say, well, I guess you can't get your benefits, or I guess you can't, we won't fill your card, and now your kid can't eat. And I see that under the guise, you know, kind of like that Cuomo attitude about New York, how he's the hero all the time. Meanwhile, he's the dictator. And he keeps talking about schools and it's, oh, the teachers don't. No, it's not the teachers, you asshole. It's every kind of crazy thing you put into place to isolate my child if they have the sniffles. But they just invert reality, right? And right now with the minority population, you feel like that is going to be the first hit. Now, do you think that obviously...
That's what they've said.
Yeah.
And they say we would normally directly prioritize them, but that might freak them out. So what we're going to do is select cohorts of the population where minorities are overrepresented, including undocumented immigrants, prisoners, and parts of the essential workforce where minorities are overrepresented. So it doesn't look like we're singling them out, but we actually are singling them out. That's straight up what this says. And the other group they want to put alongside them, the mentally challenged and disabled people, okay? Physically and mentally handicapped people. So what does that sound like to you, dude? That those are the first people to get the vaccine. Keep in mind, too, this is the first time since 2001 that the vaccine, a nationwide vaccination strategy, has been amended to exclude police officers, DHS officials. That's a little weird.
I was unaware of that. When did this? Okay, so I've heard them talking about the first people that are going to get it are going to be people.
The police don't need it, they say now. DHS doesn't need it, but they needed it ever since the anthrax attacks. But now, who needs it? Minorities and the handicapped.
And some of the other ones they've been talking about are the elderly. They've talked about hospital workers, forcing nurses, etc., to do so. I would imagine the military, but now that I hear this police exemption, I'm wondering if they have an exemption now too. And then they're talking about frontline workers or essential employees. Here's my thing. I want people to think long and hard if you're working at Target or Walmart or a grocery store and you're making $8 to $12 an hour and they say you are going to lose your job unless you take this vaccine. I'd say your job's not worth it. Do you think that they're lumping those people in because, number one, they want the illusion that they're trying to help the public at large, and number two, again, they're the most vulnerable? I mean, even if you're a manager at a Walmart, what's your take? $80K a year? You know, they're really going after people that don't have the financial means to fight back or say no.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big angle of economic coercion here, and that's why in some of these documents that are, you know, what this whole strategy was based off of, which come from the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, they talk about linking COVID-19 vaccination to food stamps, to rent assistance. If you get any sort of assistance from the state, you will have to get vaccinated to continue to receive that financial assistance, right? And that's also something they're doing where I live in Chile. That they have said they plan to do, right? So that isn't something that's exclusive to the U.S. I mean, this is really a global agenda there, and it's really awful. Like you were saying, yeah, they are going after the poor first. If you listen to how Klaus Schwab and those assholes actually describe the Great Reset, I mean, the way they basically phrase it is the people who make it get to live in the smart cities. Okay, so what does that mean? The people who, you know, are able to scrape by while they're, you know, enacting all of these policies that are pushing us into a giant serf underclass. And then the people that make it, they will herd into these cities and enslave them with technology. Okay.
Not me.
I mean,
I know Klaus is on Twitter now. Apparently he's not accepting comments on his posts, but good thing they gave him
because he's a elitist piece of shit. And I think he's been found out by enough people that he knows that he'd be getting a lot of hate. So it's just, you know, he's just there to troll us. I think he probably views it that way.
Oh, I would agree. I mean, you can't look more like a Bond villain. And, you know, I've been going into this guy. quite hard lately, just because he's there, and anyone can go to C-SPAN, and anyone can go to 1998, where he's literally almost given Bill Gates a hand job at the World Economic Forum, talking about the fourth industrial revolution with these other people that are telling you automation is coming. Even then, Hillary Clinton speaking with him, Joe Biden in 2016 is giving a keynote speech on the fourth industrial revolution, talking about automation, talking about in 2016 how the middle class in this country has already been hollowed out. All these things, talking about his over 24 dinners with President Xi of China. All in his speech, no one covering that. Well, Klaus Schwab says in the future, China is going to be in a leadership role in this fourth industrial revolution. I don't want to get too far away from the vaccines, and I want to talk about Palantir in a second, because George Soros, they talked about his investment, but then he lamented.
Bought up millions of shares of Palantir, didn't they? Well, the whole left-right paradigm about Palantir being a Peter Thiel right-leaning company is totally falling apart. So you have George Soros being a huge investor in them now, but you also have Avril Haines, who was just named by Biden to be Director of National Intelligence. She's a former Palantir consultant, and was until she joined the Biden campaign in June, right? So people on the left and the right both back Palantir, and Peter Thiel's whole thing of I am a libertarian is a whole bunch of shit. I mean, they're all fascists and they can fuck off. That's how I feel.
100%. And I hope people realize that, because, even when I posted that picture of my family, and I'm again, they're in New York. I wasn't there. Obviously, I'm not going to a hazmat party for Thanksgiving, guys. And I was taken aback. But, I saw in some of the comments, oh, they must be Democrats. No, they're not Democrats. They're not even close to Democrats. These are hardcore Christians that didn't let their kids go to public schools that run churches, guys. Okay, I don't know if they've voted Democrat ever in their life. They're rapture type Christians, for real. I got a letter from my aunt, the only one that's not wearing the mask in the picture, right around March, when I was so worried. I mean, they're downstate. They're close to the city. They're about 40 minutes out from New York City, where I grew up. But I mean, a heartfelt letter quoting scripture. I'm usually I would think that they would fight these things. And, Marissa did contract it. And at first they said she tested negative and she had pneumonia, and she's the one that went to Bear Mountain and all these things. So I kind of understand where it's coming from. But then I'm how is the fear taking hold of my family so hard? And it doesn't give me hope for post warp speed and post vaccine, because we've talked about, they want the masks. They want the social distancing. They want this to stay normal.
It's obedience conditioning. I mean, that's what all of this is about at this point. They want you to wear your mask correctly. You got to keep the nose covered. You have to wear it in the way that they want you to. You have to do this and that. They're going to keep tacking on more and more shit to this to see how much people will put up with. I mean, they're basically treating us like fucking cattle, and being all right, you have to do this, and that, and we're just following it along like sheep. I mean, no, the way to fight this is to disobey.